Okay, this lecture is about a really interesting piece of archaeology called the Ishtar Gate, which is actually a gate built by the king Nebuchadnezzar. And if you had Sunday school when you were a kid, you may have run across this name, King Nebuchadnezzar. He's the same king who's mentioned in the Bible. So I always find this kind of cool because it's, you know, stuff that you grow up hearing about, maybe in other contexts, and then there's actual physical remains of this stuff. So the Ishtar Gate is a gate that is dedicated to the goddess Ishtar, who's a goddess of love in Babylonian religion. And this gate was one of the few gates into the city of Babylon, which Nebuchadnezzar had constructed. These things form, and a lot of cities have these, you know, walls around the entire city and then a few gates that are access points. This is very crucial in any society where there's a lot of warfare going on, you know, because it keeps the bad guys out and it keeps the people in as well. And it also serves a sort of political propagandistic function. So we're talking about later on in the history of the ancient Near East, in the city of Babylon, which again is a city that, or is ancient remains of which are in what's now Iraq. Here, by the way, the original Ishtar Gate, the bricks that formed the Ishtar Gate were actually excavated and then taken out of Iraq in the 1930s by a German archaeologist, and they're now in one of the big museums in Berlin. So you're looking here at a view of the Ishtar Gate as it's been reconstructed inside the Berlin Museum. It is made of basically mud brick, the same kind of mud brick that the ziggurats had been made out of 2,000 years before this. I mean, it's crazy. We're talking in a few lectures about a lot of human history going from the Sumerians up to the Babylonians. But some things that they do have in common anyway, which is, like I said, what I want you to focus on. So these guys were still using mud brick, but in this case they'd also developed, and those of you who've done ceramics will be familiar with this, they developed paints that you could paint onto the dried brick and then heat at a high temperature to create a kind of hard, shiny, glazed surface. And that is what the Ishtar Gate is made of. It's made of mud brick and glazed mud brick. So glazed just means that it's been painted and then fired, heated up to a high temperature to create a kind of permanent, hard, glossy outer paint shell. And you can probably just make out here that you've got basically lions and some griffins and things like that covering the Ishtar Gate. Here's a nice close-up of the Ishtar Gate. The gate as it is reconstructed in Berlin is a combination of original tiles. If you look on that slide on the left, you can see there's that horizontal band of decoration where the tiles look a lot more smashed up and dirty. Those are the original tiles. The ones above there on the top half of that picture that looks so nice and shiny and clean, those were created in the 1930s. So it's a combination. What you see if you go to Berlin is a combination of the old original stuff and then some recreations. By the way, you might recognize, we'll be talking in another lecture about that post in front of the Ishtar Gate. That is the Steely of Hammurabi. That is an important pillar monument that has inscribed on it the Code of Laws of Hammurabi. Again, somebody who you may have heard of before. I think he also shows up somewhere in the Old Testament, and he is one of the first leaders to have a written codified set of laws that, in fact, the law an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth comes actually from Hammurabi. Anyway, so there in Berlin you've got the reproduction and original tiles of the Ishtar Gate. And there on the right you can see the lion made up of a combination of both reproduction and original tiles. By the way, this, like I said, is also came from Iraq, and here you've got a reconstruction on the old site of the city of Babylon, funded in the 1960s and 70s by Saddam Hussein. And this is one of those pictures I found on a soldier's website where you can see clearly the U.S. Army. It's after the occupation of Iraq, and somebody who was there got this great picture of soldiers in front of this monument. I always think it's real interesting to see that Saddam Hussein was very, very aware of the grand history of Mesopotamia and always wanted to put himself kind of in that lineage, you know, so that there had been Nebuchadnezzar and Hammurabi, and now there was going to be Saddam Hussein. And this is just another reconstruction of what the Ishtar Gate looked like. And here is the Ishtar Gate. It's imagined as it looked when it was preventing people from coming into the city or allowing people to come into the city. And we do have some literary descriptions of the Ishtar Gate. In fact, we have dedicatory inscriptions, and I've got a link that I want you to look at, and then I'm going to have you comment in a voice thread about the Ishtar Gate after you read Nebuchadnezzar's commentary, the inscription on the gate itself, because it's very clear from these inscriptions that Nebuchadnezzar and the people who built this gate were very conscious of it being symbolic as well as being practical and functional. And there's just another line from the Ishtar Gate. So one of the things I want you to think about as you're reading the descriptions and the inscriptions and all of that is the visual impact of the gate, what's put on the gate, and the use of things like lions on the gate, this recurring theme of animal symbolism that we see in ancient Near Eastern art. That's what the inscription looks like. And again, I've got the website linked from the voice thread for you to comment on. Oh, and I just thought I'd mention Nebuchadnezzar's palace was also rebuilt by Saddam Hussein, so there's another courtesy of the U.S. Army photo. You can just make out there on that wall the kind of jagged line going across over the soldiers' heads. Below the line is the original brick, and above the line is Saddam Hussein's reconstruction. And he also rebuilt a city gate, and then through the city gate you can see the archaeological remains of some of these ancient kings' palaces. And that's all for this lecture, so I'll see you next time.